They say the straw that breaks the camel's back is usually something insignificant. A misplaced word, a forgotten birthday. For me, the final catalyst that detonated a 42-year relationship with my mother wasn't a screaming match in the rain or a dramatic betrayal. It was a rusted, heavy cast-iron tea kettle. If you have ever survived the psychological meat grinder of a covert narcissist, you know that the actual object of their obsession never matters. What matters is the control. For decades, I played the game. I tried the hands-off approach throughout my 30s, keeping her at arm's length. As I learned about my own codependency, I started calling out her manipulations, finding a brief, hollow satisfaction in watching her spiral into a narcissistic rage when she realized I wouldn't fold. But treating your own mother like a hostile witness in a courtroom is exhausting. It erodes your mental baseline. I was already debating if cutting ties entirely was my only path to peace. Then, the kettle whistled. The prologue to this absolute disaster started 4 years earlier. My grandmother, Opal, a former nursing home aide with a laugh like wind chimes, started declining in health. I made a promise long ago that I would never let her rot in a sterile facility. So I packed up my life, walked away from a flourishing career, and took a massive pay cut at a smaller clinic in my hometown. The catch. I had to move into Opal's house. A house that, upon her passing, would revert entirely to my mother, Corinne. Corinne is a woman who treats affection like a high-interest loan, but for Opal, I would have paid any price. For 4 years, I maintained that property. I fixed the leaky gutters, paid the utility bills, and mowed the lawn, never asking Corinne for a single dime. Those 4 years with Opal were a sanctuary, a brief pocket of genuine love in an otherwise chaotic family dynamic. Then, Opal passed. The floral scent of funeral arrangements hadn't even faded from the living room before Corinne swept in. Her designer heels clicked aggressively against the hardwood as she started laying down the new regime. She informed me that to remain in her house, a house she had zero intention of living in, I would need to pay a steep monthly rent and follow a bizarre list of maintenance rules. She expected me to bow my head and hand over my paycheck. Instead, I looked at her, smiled tightly, and said absolutely not. I told her I was moving. The panic that flashed across Corinne's face was almost comical. Without me there, she had no live-in caretaker for the property, no one to hold her financial leverage over. She tried everything. She fabricated old debts I supposedly owed her. She dangled the ultimate carrot, promising to sign the deed over to me if I just stayed. When bribery failed, she turned to threats, warning our extended family that anyone who helped me move would be dead to her. She was trying to ground a 39-year-old woman. I didn't argue. I just kept my head down, packed every single box myself, rented a U-Haul, and drove out of that driveway less than a month later. 5 months passed in my new city. I was trying, against my better judgment, to keep a thread of a relationship alive. Just one more try, I told myself. My Aunt Marisol had created a group chat for the 3 of us to share daily updates and funny memes. Mostly, it was a way for Marisol to check in on my new place. Predictably, Corinne used the chat to drop passive-aggressive critiques about my new, independent life. I let the remarks slide, gently reminding her that I would have happily stayed in my hometown had she not tried to extort me. That only fueled her fire. She branded me ungrateful, claiming she was a saint for not charging me rent while I was actively keeping her mother alive. Mind you, Corinne had recently remarried a wealthy doctor named Sterling, absorbing every penny of my grandfather's inheritance in the process. She wasn't hurting for cash, she was just fundamentally greedy. Then came the text that lit the fuse. Out of nowhere, Corinne sent a message to the group chat accusing me of looting her house when I moved. I stared at the screen, my brow furrowing, and typed back, asking what exactly she thought I had stolen. Instead of typing, she called. I answered, bracing myself for the incoming screech. She immediately launched into a blistering tirade, her voice a shrill siren over the speakerphone. She accused me of sneaking an antique cast-iron tea kettle off the old wood stove and giving it to my father, Thaddeus. I stood in my new kitchen, utterly baffled. I told her there hadn't been a kettle on that stove in the 4 years I lived there. I hadn't even noticed it was missing, but Corinne was operating on her own twisted version of history. This kettle was a generations-old heirloom from Thaddeus's family. Growing up, I knew its history well. Corinne had taken it during their bitter divorce purely out of spite, weaponizing a piece of his family's legacy just to twist the knife. Now, somehow, she had discovered it was back in his possession, and her fractured logic dictated that I must have been the smuggler. I kept my voice terrifyingly calm, repeating that I had no idea what she was talking about. She didn't care. She demanded I retrieve the kettle immediately, or there would be hell to pay. I hung up the phone, rubbing my temples, and dialed my father. Thaddeus is a practical, rugged man who survived the Corinne hurricane decades ago. When he picked up the phone, he didn't even say hello. He just chuckled and said, "Is this about the tea kettle?" I let out a harsh laugh. Bingo. He filled in the missing pieces. Years ago, while Opal was still alive and I was living there, Thaddeus used to visit. He and Opal had always shared a warm, mutual respect. During one visit, Opal casually brought up the old iron kettle gathering dust in the back of a cabinet. She knew Corinne had stolen it. She knew it belonged to his family. So Opal simply handed it back to him. She told him Corinne probably didn't even remember she had it. Thaddeus took his family heirloom home, quietly grateful to the woman who was a better mother-in-law than Corinne was a wife. Fast forward to a few weeks ago. Thaddeus was grabbing a beer with an old buddy, swapping war stories about their respective divorces. Thaddeus joked that it took 20 years, but he finally got one piece of his family history back from his ex-wife. The buddy's girlfriend overheard the story. She happened to be charmed by Corinne's fake public persona and immediately ran to her to gossip. Corinne had called Thaddeus, shrieking that he was a thief. Thaddeus, entirely unbothered, reminded her that it had his family name stamped on the bottom and told her she'd freeze in hell before she ever touched it again. Infuriated and outmatched, Corinne needed a scapegoat. She decided I was the traitor who orchestrated the exchange. Listening to Thaddeus recount the sheer absurdity of it all, a profound, bone-deep exhaustion washed over me. It was so unnecessary, so draining. At that exact second, the final fraying thread of my patience snapped. Armed with the truth, I returned to the group chat with Marisol and Corinne. I typed out the exact sequence of events, explaining that Opal gave the kettle back. Corinne immediately fired back, calling me a dirty liar, hurling nasty, degrading insults right there in front of my aunt. Normally, I kept our conflicts private. I never wanted to drag collateral damage into her messy psychological warfare, and despite everything, I never wanted to humiliate her publicly. But the kettle incident wasn't isolated. It was layered on top of another massive, provable lie she had tried to feed me just weeks prior. A month before, Corinne had tried a different tactic to lure me back. She claimed she and Sterling had put their 3-story hoarder mansion on the market. They were allegedly downsizing to a tiny 3-bedroom cabin while a new home was built. Her grand offer. I could move into the cabin with them, confined to one single bedroom, but she and Sterling would generously allow me access to the communal kitchen and bathroom. I had politely declined, preferring my independence in the city. But I knew Corinne. I knew her pathological need to invent realities. During my hands-off years, I had started recording her calls, legal in my one-party consent state, just to ground myself in reality when the gaslighting got too thick. I had also asked a childhood friend, Declan, who was now a real estate agent, to check the local listings. Declan loathed Corinne for how she had treated his own mother years ago. He happily scoured the MLS databases. Corinne's mansion was not on the market. It hadn't been listed anywhere at any price for the last year. As Corinne continued to berate me in the group chat, attempting to shred my character for Marisol to see, I opened a separate private message to my aunt. "I am so sorry if this upsets you," I typed, "but this has been 41 years in the making and I am entirely done." Marisol called me immediately, her voice trembling with concern. For the first time in my life, I didn't protect my mother. I told Marisol everything. The extortion attempt after Opal's death, the hoarding, the gaslighting, the kettle. When we hung up, I went back to the main group chat. I didn't argue with Corinne's insults. I simply uploaded the screenshots from Declan's real estate database showing her address with a stark, not for sale status. I added a brief message. "Just like the house that was supposedly on the market, you are lying." The chat went dead silent. Then the backpedaling began. Frantic, disjointed texts from Corinne flooded the screen, claiming the listing was just too new to show up, that the realtor was delaying it. I replied calmly that it had been over a month since her original claim. Marisol chimed in, a single disappointed message expressing her shock. Privately, Marisol texted me her full support, understanding that after decades of taking the high road, I had finally reached the end of the pavement. Predictably, the fallout was swift and vicious. Corinne, her ego bruised and her false narrative challenged, went on a scorched-earth smear campaign. She mobilized her flying monkeys, distant relatives, old family friends, anyone in our hometown who would listen. My phone started buzzing with venomous messages from people I barely spoke to, condemning me as a wretched, ungrateful daughter who abandoned her grieving mother. I ignored them for days. I was perfectly fine letting her control the narrative in a town I didn't even live in anymore. But then, a local preacher, a man I had never met in my entire life, sent me a long, condescending Facebook message attempting to shame me into begging for her forgiveness. I saw red. I realized that keeping the peace only protected the abuser, so I prepared my own version of scorched earth. I opened my phone and created a new group text. I added every single contact relevant to her life. I added my aunt, my father, Corinne's friends, her ex-friends, her hoarder husband Sterling, his adult children, the judgmental preacher, and every flying monkey who had harassed me that week. There was no greeting, no context. I just started uploading the audio files. I uploaded the recording of Corinne trashing her current husband's kids. I sent the screenshots of her mocking the preacher's sermons. I dropped the voicemails where she viciously tore apart the very friends who were currently defending her. I unloaded years of her raw, unfiltered venom, meticulously preserved to protect my own sanity, now weaponized to destroy her public facade. The loading bars filled, one by one, delivering the undeniable truth to dozens of pockets across my hometown. At the very end, I dropped the real estate screenshots again, exposing her compulsive lying to her entire social circle. Before anyone could type a single word in response, Thaddeus, who had been quietly observing the digital carnage, uploaded a single photo. It was the rusted, cast-iron tea kettle sitting peacefully on his stove. Underneath it, he typed one sentence: "Was this really worth it?" Then, Thaddeus and I both permanently exited the chat. The shockwave from that mass text ruffled feathers that will likely never be smoothed. Many people were horrified by the things Corinne had said about them behind their backs. A few doubled down, blaming me for being cruel enough to expose her. Some actually reached out to apologize to me. I didn't care either way. I cut contact with most of them not out of malice, but because I simply didn't need the clutter in my life. I don't harbor resentment, but I also don't miss them. I landed a fatal blow to the only thing Corinne ever truly cared about, her pristine public image. Now she gets to be the victim she always pretended to be, entirely isolated in a hoarded mansion she never intended to sell. All of this destruction, all of these severed ties, could have been avoided if she hadn't lost her mind over an old, rusty piece of iron that held absolutely no sentimental value to her. It was just a token of victory, a trophy of control. I went completely no contact that day. I changed my number. I hear whispers through the grapevine that she is miserable, that her credibility is shot, and that she blames everyone but herself. But I steer those conversations away. I don't need updates. I spent over 4 decades breaking my own back to be the good daughter, to absorb the shock of her toxicity. When I finally broke, I broke hard. It might make me ruthless in the eyes of some, but the peace I wake up with every morning is worth any judgment. If I had to do it all over again, I would choose the exact same path. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop protecting the people who consistently hurt you. Toxic family members rely on your silence to maintain their illusion of perfection. By refusing to play the game, by shining a light on the truth, you reclaim your own narrative. It's not about revenge. It's about establishing a boundary so impenetrable that their poison can never reach you again. If you're dealing with a narcissist, remember that your peace of mind is worth infinitely more than their fragile ego. If this story resonated with you, or if you've ever had to cut ties for your own survival, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about reclaiming your life. Drop a comment below. What was the tea kettle moment that finally made you walk away? Until next time, protect your peace.